So, to begin the conversation tonight, I will read the Columbia Land Conservancy's land acknowledgement. We humbly and gratefully acknowledge that Columbia County, New York is predominantly on the ancestral lands of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans, who are the indigenous people of this land. They were subject to genocide, coerced into assimilation, and forcibly removed from their homelands to what is now known as Wisconsin. They continue to retain their unbroken status as a sovereign native nation. Despite removal, they continue to hold relationships with their homeland and settler communities. As a land trust and one of the many stewards of this place, CLC understands that access to land is a sacred and collective right. CLC recognizes the indigenous history of this land, honors ancestors past and present, and supports current efforts to build more equitable spaces for all the human and non-human relatives who call this place home. It's now my pleasure to introduce this evening's speakers, Terence Duvall and Jason Gold and Finegan Ferreboeuf of Steelbow Farm. So Terence Duvall joined the Columbia Land Conservancy in 2015 after completing a Master of Science degree at Bard Center for Environmental Policy at Bard College. Since then, he has supported CLC's farmland protection and land access work, managing the farmer landowner matching program and completing conservation easements on farmland through New York State Department of Agriculture. My cat has something to say tonight. Market Farmland Protection Implementation and Grant Program. Some of his favorite work involves using innovative conservation tools, such as the preemptive purchase right and the agricultural ground lease to make farmland affordable for farmers and connecting with community members who care about the land. Currently, Terence is the Land Director of Land Protection and Stewardship. It's also my pleasure to introduce Jason Gold and Finegan Ferreboeuf, who operate Steelbow Farm on leased land in Ancram, New York. The two met while transplanting onions in Austin, Texas over a decade ago. After managing mixed vegetable farms for a few years, the pair decided they were ready to leave behind fire ants, bluebonnets, and breakfast tacos to start their own farming venture. Abundance of water, affordable land, and meaningful resources for beginning farmers brought them north to Maine. After a couple more moves, farm leases, and a stint back in Austin, they have happily settled on the historic Thompson Finch Farm property. 2026 will be their 9th season in business and first full season in the Hudson Valley, where they will grow 2 acres of organic you-pick strawberries, 1.5 acres of blueberries, 10 acres of diversified vegetables, culinary herbs, and a pumpkin patch. Food and the people who grow it are always central at Steelbow. They care deeply for the land and the humans who work it. Varieties are chosen with love and care for exceptional flavor and quality. Finegan and Jason are humbled and ever so grateful for all of the support and encouragement they have received from their new neighbors in the wider agricultural community. They are also excited to be part of this creative farmland access solution and the wider CLC community. You can follow their progress with this transition on Instagram at Steelbow Farm or visit their website at steelbowfarm.com. And so with that, it is my absolute pleasure to pass the mic to Terence to get the conversation rolling this evening.
All right. Thank you so much, Mallory. I hope everyone can see my slideshow. As Mallory said, oh, you can't. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Because there's one more button to press. How about now? Great. All right, thank you. As Mallory said, my name is Terence. I'm very excited to speak with you tonight about the ground lease transition that CLC was able to facilitate between Thompson Finch Farm and Steelbow Farm. I hope it's all right. I also want to do a quick shout out and say thank you to Mallory. Mallory, this will be her last community conversation as she's offered a really great opportunity that she's going to pursue. We're sorry to say goodbye to her, but we're excited to keep working with her professionally in the future. And I just wanted to say her work on these community conversations the last couple of years has been great, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. So thanks, Mallory. In my portion of this presentation, we're going to just look at a quick introduction to CLC's farmland protection and our land access work. I can answer the question, what is an agricultural ground lease? We can look at the history of Thompson Finch Farm, how it became CLC's first agricultural ground lease in 2019, how the search for the next farmers began in 2023, and how we were able to complete this transition with Jason and Finegan in 2025. So farmland protection is so important in the Hudson Valley and Columbia County, where we have some really great prime agricultural soils, but not an endless supply of them. We have a great amount of productive farms, but without protection, a lot of those farm fields that are currently being farmed or that are intact could be subdivided, could be developed on, could be brought out of production. And the more of that happens, the less likely it is that farms can either begin and move into the area or existing farms can continue, as the whole farm system is somewhat reliant on having a baseline amount of available farmland. The image you see on this screen came from the data work that we did as part of our countywide conservation plan. The darkest areas there show those parcels that have those characteristics I just described. The green areas are lands that have already been protected. But we know that it's very important to make sure that our energy is going to keeping farms in business and making sure that there's a place for farms to continue to farm in the future. Some of the challenges that farmers in our area face is basically the cost of living is very high. The cost of farmland exceeds what a farmer can generate per acre. When you bring off-farm revenue, off-farm income into this real estate market, as we saw during the COVID pandemic and since, the cost of land skyrockets. It's hard to afford housing close to a farm for farm labor. It's hard to acquire land when it's on the market because there's a limited availability. There are programs such as the Farmland for a New Generation program operated by American Farmland Trust that seek to facilitate transfers and keep farmland in production either through lease or through ownership. To date, CLC has been able to protect about 12,000 acres of farmland through 53 conservation easements where we purchased the development rights from the farmers using grants and partner funding. That's where we've been able to give cash to a landowner who then sells us this conservation easement and in that those development rights so that we can ensure that those fields will be kept in production or be kept open and not developed on. 8 of these 53 projects also included the preemptive purchase right agreement. And what that does is it ensures that the land is going to remain farmer owned and sold at its agricultural value in the future. So not only protecting the land, but trying to help direct the future of that land so that it stays in production. Through all of this work, we've been able to deliver $31 million to our local economy. That's through federal grants, state grants, and partner funding. And since 2008, we've maintained our farmer landowner match program, where we try to help farmers who are interested in leasing farmland connect with landowners and help farmers who are looking to acquire land find either available farmland, or if they have available farmland, consider whether conservation funding might make it more affordable for them. So an agricultural ground lease, a ground lease itself is kind of an interesting way of looking at real estate. It looks at the ownership and it splits it kind of between above and below ground. And so in this situation, Columbia Land Conservancy owns the land and everything below it. The farmers own the improvements. So the barns, the housing, even the wells, which admittedly go below ground, would be continue to be owned by the leasing farmers. The lease itself, it's long-term and secure. It has a lot of protections in place, so the farmers are assured that they're not going to get pushed off the land. They're going to be able to stay on the land for the duration of that lease. This lease, it's actually a 99-year lease, so the goal there is that Jason and Finegan know that for as long as they're interested in farming this property, they can continue to farm it, they can raise their family there, they can invest in that infrastructure, and the lease itself is going to protect them, as well as the fact that we've been doing a lot of relationship building through this whole process. And an interesting part of this arrangement then is that as one farm leaves a ground lease and another farm comes into it, those improvements that the existing farmer owns, they get sold to the incoming farmers. So the equity that a farm builds over time above the land with their improvements stays with them when they leave the property. That's something that's unique in a leasing model. It doesn't often exist. And the way that the ground lease is structured is actually those things will transfer at their agricultural value, and that any housing, similar to that preemptive purchase right agreement that I mentioned before, any housing that's sold will be tethered to its kind of the real estate market, so the median home sale value in Columbia County. Thompson Finch Farm had been in Marnie McLean's family for generations, around 1850 through 2025. She and her family have been living there, have been farming that land. It's an interesting property, about 200 acres in Ancram. It's bisected by the Rolliff Jansen Kill, which is an important waterway in Columbia County. It supports multiple habitats, and it's in a part of the county that historically has been used for ages for food production and fishing by indigenous groups. Don and Marnie have been farming that land. They were kind of spearheads of the organic farm movement during this time. So for 40 years, they worked and lived on the property. They developed their successful U-pick strawberry and blueberry operation. They became a mainstay in the community. And they began talking to CLC about farmland conservation options when it became clear that they wanted to stay on the property, but the land itself, which had been owned by a trust, was going to be sold, and it was going to be sold at its real estate value. And so we started to strategize with them over 10 years ago about how could they continue their operation, how could they ensure that that land that they cared so much for could continue to be farmed, could continue to be a community asset, creating food, and maintained in the future. So our initial strategy was to apply for one of those grants that I described, which would have been able to purchase the development rights, reducing the resale value of the property, making it more affordable for CLC as a conservation organization to acquire. However, when we applied for that initial grant funding, it was not awarded. And so we strategized with Don and Marnie and partner organizations. We came up with a community fundraising strategy. And in 2019, we were able to protect the property. So Don and Marnie protected it with an easement that's being held by the Dutchess Land Conservancy. CLC purchased the property from Don and Marnie. They retained ownership of those improvements, and we signed the ground lease. And then as a quick overview, here's Thompson Finch Farm. You can see the Rolliff Jansen Kill here highlighted. It has further environmental protections, as does the wetland area in the southern portion of the property. Everything here in the green is active farming, about 100 acres of farmland in production. Don and Marnie reached out to CLC back in 2023. They told us that they were ready to consider retiring and they would like help finding the next farmers. So we helped them prepare a request for proposals. We helped circulate that announcement both locally through local farmer networks as well as nationally. And the goal of this transition from Don and Marnie's point of view, as well as CLC's, they wanted to find experienced farmers who had a business plan that fit that property, that would be a good fit, and ideally a business that was willing to take on and continue the U-pick strawberry operation that they had developed and has become a mainstay in the community. Farmers were asked to submit letters of interest to Don and Marnie. Don and Marnie spoke to those farmers. And then three finalists were asked to submit business plans and proposals. Don and Marnie reviewed those along with feedback that CLC gave them, as well as representative from the Soil and Water Conservation District Office, the Agricultural Farmland Protection Board, and a local farmer. And that led to, I believe it was about January of 2025, Don and Marnie selected Steelbow Farm. I can say some of the things that really stood out about Jason and Finegan's proposals for Thompson Finch Farm is they showed that they had a successful existing operation and they had plans to continue that operation, but those plans could be adapted to a new setting. So it was ambitious to say we're going to move from Texas, but they showed everyone how they're going to do it. They're also proactive in connecting with local farms and making those connections and figuring out where are the markets, who would we be speaking with once we get there. And they did that back from Texas, and they traveled back and forth to meet with Don and Marnie and to work with them. And then they were also willing to take on what we're talking about tonight, which is a very unique situation. It's not as easy as signing something and it being done. It took a lot of work, and they signed on for that back a year ago. So then between January of 2025 and July of 2025, we had to finalize the sale prices for the improvements and the equipment that Don and Marnie were selling to Jason and Finegan. We had to review and revise the original ground lease that we had signed in 2019, so it was more applicable to Jason and Finegan's operation. We had to research other ground lease transfers to learn from others because this was a unique experience for CLC. And we sought expertise from others that had, more resources and research capabilities than we did. So Pace Food Law Clinic and Equity Trust. Like some of my takeaways from this experience is that it was a very unique experience, and I feel like we were all learning as we went, and occasionally we'd have to kind of take, a couple steps back, reconsider what we were doing, and then go forward again. And so that was a lot of back and forth. CLC in this role was working with Steelbow Farm on the next ground lease. We were working with Thompson Finch Farm on wrapping up their ground lease, and Steelbow Farm and Thompson Finch Farm were working directly with each other to transfer those improvements. And so that triangle of communication took a lot of development and work on everyone's part. Let's see, and I think the thing on this screen that I'm looking forward to the most is that now that we're at this point, we've gotten to know Jason and Finegan. I guess I've known you for a couple of years already, but the relationship between CLC and Steelbow Farm is new and it's growing, and I think there's a lot of fun and exciting opportunities there. I'm also just really excited to see this farm kind of establish itself on this historic property and see what they do with it, because I think as much as they can continue some of the tradition of Thompson Finch Farm, they're already bringing a lot of their own energy into it. And I think that's really exciting, both for Jason Finegan, for CLC as the landowner, but I think for the farm community as a whole. So I'm really glad Jason and Finegan are here. I'm really glad everyone here is here tonight. If anybody is interested in reaching out to me with any questions or continuing this, if you have questions that we can't answer tonight, please feel free to send me an email, give me a call. I'd be happy to speak with anyone. And with that, I'm ready to pass it off to Jason and Finegan.
Oh, yeah, muted.
All right.
Now we're not muted.
Hello.
Hi, thank you, Terence.
Mallory.
And Mallory, yeah, thank you, Mallory, for putting this together, and Terence for your presentation, and also for for doing all the triangulating that this whole transition has required. So yeah, we are Steelbow Farm, and we kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about the journey that got us here to this property, and then also kind of what we're excited about and looking forward to in our plans for the future, because we're kind of at an interesting crossroads here in 2026 with this really beautiful land base that we get to work on. So I think why our story is relevant for all of you, and I think for a lot of farmers, contemporary farmers right now, is because it is a meandering story. We have farmed now, well, we have operated our own farm now in 3 different states with 3 different leases, which I don't think is generally what folks think about when you're thinking about a farm operation. And we'll get into that. But we met, maybe you can.
Sure, yeah. We met just over a decade ago now, both working on farms in Austin, Texas, and we knew that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to keep doing that, but neither of us are from Texas. I'm from the lower Hudson Valley. Finegan's from California, and Texas was really expensive in 2014. It's even more expensive now, but it didn't seem like the place we were going to stay. So we up and moved to Maine, where I have a little bit of history, and that's where we decided to start our farming journey on our own. So
yeah, we kind of sprinkled pictures in.
Yeah,
so that's an early shot of us in Maine. But yeah, so we ended up in central Maine in
in 2017. We ended up there in particular because, especially coming from Texas, a lot of the northeastern states have a lot more incentives to kind of offer young farmers their
Support structures.
support structures, scaffolding. Maine at the time, MOFGA had a really amazing Journey Person program, which we were involved in, which linked us with mentors and all sorts of professional development, and like financial stipends to get a business up and going. Also, at the time, Maine had affordable, like really good agricultural land. They also had programs like FarmLink, which I think New York State does as well, but basically programs that match landowners with land seekers. So that's how we were able to find a pretty undeveloped property that we brought our travel trailer onto and lived in for 3 seasons. But we started there. We started super small. It was just the two of us. We both had off-farm jobs, really like on other farms or for seed companies up there. And then we grew the business gradually. And what started as like a half an acre became an acre and a half. We started selling into Portland. We started a small CSA. Eventually, we were doing 3 farmers markets and then working with a number of restaurants in the Portland area. And then hired our first employees, which was a big deal to us because we had just been, just the two of us and felt like we were real enough to actually start, employing people in our, second year?
Third
year.
And then in 2019 into 2020, we were again at an interesting crossroads. Finegan was pregnant with our first child, and we had kind of come to an understanding with our landlord in Maine that it was time to part ways. We were kind of ready for something bigger or different, and he was ready for something different on his property as well. And it was pretty amicable parting. And we were presented with the opportunity by some former employers and mentors back in Austin to lease their farm as they were retiring. And it was a 5-acre farm, 20 minutes from downtown Austin. Finegan's parents were now living in Austin, Texas, and we were expecting our first kid. And it was kind of a situation that we couldn't turn down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we should say too, we kind of spent that season, it was the summer, really weighing the pros and cons. We were also looking for land to buy closer to Portland at the time, to see if we could make that work. I think the business was like at an interesting kind of like inflection point where we had been doing it for a few years. We were growing the business, and we kind of realized like, oh, maybe we can really do this. Like we can actually be full-time farmers and provide a livelihood for ourselves and a family. But we couldn't, I don't know, we weren't finding the right property. We weren't finding something where we wanted to be. And then really just kind of there are a lot of amazing farmers in Maine. There are a ton of farmers. There is not a very large population. And I think what drew us back to Austin was the fact that there aren't a ton of farms and there is a much larger population. And we had already connections to restaurants and potential customers in Austin from working there. And we felt like it was a good kind of business move, I guess.
So we picked up our whole farm and moved it down to Austin and got right to it. And over 5 seasons back in Texas, we scaled up to 3.5 acres of production, $500,000 annually gross, and a pretty sizable crew, 10 to 12 on average, sometimes a little bit more. And started trying to vision the next move because we knew we wouldn't be on that land forever because we were leasing it on a year-to-year basis. So we were scaling up our equipment and trying to figure out how we're going to get ourselves onto a larger land base so we could grow more vegetables. And that brings us to probably how we ended up here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when we were looking, the other thing, again, like at a certain point, because of the short-term lease situation, it really limited what we could do in terms of investment on the property. And kind of, we hit a point where we felt like our business needed certain investments in order to grow. There were certain things because the landlords, like, had, the landlords didn't want like people coming onto the farm so we can do our on-farm sales or events. So we were limited in certain ways. And we wanted to grow the business, and we felt a little stymied, both by the lease and then also the kind of astronomical cost of land in Central Texas.
But during COVID, land went crazy everywhere, but Central Texas was wild.
Yeah, when we were looking, I guess it was in 2020 or 2021 when we were really
Land was $50,000 an acre.
Like land was $50,000 an acre for farmland around Austin.
These are just a couple pictures of us farming in Austin, what that looked like. More of that.
Crops. So how did we in Austin end up like engaging with CLC and ending up moving to the Hudson Valley? I guess we were looking further afield than Texas. Neither of us are from there. We were a little burnt out on growing 52 weeks out of the year, especially in the summers there, which are very hot and very dry.
We were trying to figure out a place we could move again and continue to farm, but also now we have 2 children and we want to go to a place where we have community. And we went back to Texas. We had been there before. We had community there. So Hudson Valley was a place we looked because I grew up here. We have other friends in the farming community here in Southern Columbia County, Northern Dutchess County. And that led us to reach out to CLC just to see what was going on, if there were programs for accessing farmland, whatever. And they informed us of this opportunity off the bat. And that's
and it seemed like a little too good to pass up. So I think really like we weren't thinking that much of it, but we thought we would, shoot our shot and throw our hats in the ring. And then obviously like things got a little more serious. Oh, what did I do? Thank you. So I think there were things kind of about our story and our history that in some ways made us a really good fit for this situation, just because we were, as farmers who have never owned land, I think the thought of a ground lease wasn't as daunting as maybe folks who are really just looking to eventually end up on something that they do own outright. Also, just like lots of friends in Maine purchased land with conservation easements on it. So it was something like that we were a little more familiar with from the get-go.
So yeah, I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't have looked at this opportunity the same way we did, considering the position we were coming from. So we applied we filled out the request for proposal, sent in the letter, talked to Don and Marnie a lot, traveled a lot. And it put us in a place where we were, leasing on a year-to-year basis and not really able to invest in infrastructure on the land. And now we have secure tenure and equity in sort of a unique model.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something too, knowing how difficult land access can be. I think both of us were really excited about being part of a project that was just finding really creative land access solutions. I think that's kind of like the takeaway on our end is like that's what kind of beginning farmers need to stay afloat and stay in business is creative solutions like this one.
Yeah.
And this Terence, this was just we can kind of skip past this. This was just Terrence kind of
So,
covered this, but this was just a little bit about kind of the process because once we were selected,
that's kind of when the real work began of
yeah.
actually figuring out how this is going to happen. It seemed like the application process was work, and then Don and Marty selected us, and we realized, oh, there's a lot of steps between here and there now. So then we arrived in April of 2025, and we didn't stop arriving until I think sometime in early July. I think that I made, well, we moved a farm once from Maine to Texas, but it was a much smaller farm. So moving from Texas up here took a lot more trips than we were expecting, and I think the last one happened in early July.
Yeah.
So, but we hit the ground running. We planted 2 acres of strawberries, which is what Marnie had planted last year. So we're trying to keep the strawberry tradition going. We managed the blueberries, starting with pruning at the end of the winter, and then running the U-pick this summer. And then we were intending on doing some more vegetable production this summer, but we just weren't ready for it. So hopefully next year. But we've been doing infrastructure projects over the winter to try to get ourselves ready for veggies. We did a little bit last year, but not a ton.
And then, yeah, I mean, I think part of this process, as Terrence mentioned already, was this this is kind of a novel thing. So I think everyone was learning as as we went and we were learning together. Farm succession can be really complicated. You're managing or yeah, there's different people with different kind of at different trajectories in their life. There's like the history of this place and then the future of this place. And sometimes that can maybe be a little bit in tension. And then one thing I think too was maybe we had underestimated like how large a transition moving an entire farm across country is. So I think the settling in process, took a little bit longer than maybe we had thought in a really optimistic way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess, there is, yeah, we're excited to be here. We're excited to grow here. There is this truth of, that we shut down a business and moved it here. And it kind of is a gamble of like, can we get back to where we were, here, and can we find the customers that we need? So that's a real challenge that we're facing ahead of us. I think we feel like very optimistic about that, but it is, we moved across the country and we left a lot of certainty behind. But I do think like having farmed in numerous places, it has made us kind of better, more resilient farmers. And we're kind of up for the challenge, even though we've uprooted a few more times than maybe the,
And then what's next for us? So we're gonna keep the pick your own tradition. We mulched all the strawberries right before Christmas, and are looking at the blueberries and the apple trees over the winter, getting ready to start pruning those. We're thinking about expanding. We planted some asparagus. We're going to plant some more asparagus. We're putting in rhubarb this spring, and then we're looking at other fruit to expand into, to
kind of round out
the U-pick operation, but also try to maintain the business that we have been for the past 10 years, which has been specialty vegetable production, and try to figure out how those two can work in concert together. We didn't do a lot of vegetable growing this past season, but we're planning on trying to get back up to a production scale in 2026. We're putting up a greenhouse right now. Hopefully we'll be actually done with that tomorrow. Plastic's supposed to go on tomorrow, so we'll have our propagation greenhouse up. And then also over the winter, we're planning on building out a wash pack and putting in a new well, um, so we can process vegetables. And then kind of just continuing the traditions that I've gone here, continuing relationships with neighboring farmers. Stuart Farr and Sarah Chase have always used this land as well, and there's plenty of room for them there. And maybe trying to get people on the farm more, maybe building out a farm store, having events on the property, things of that nature.
Yeah, and then I guess really just to add to it is the thing that we we haven't really talked about that much, but the thing that we have always really loved doing is growing vegetables. So we want to keep growing like really beautiful, delicious, interesting varieties of veggies. We're just kind of vegetable nerds, actually. So we can't quit veggies. And that's, yeah, just being passionate about growing food we love is why we do this. And then we're excited really to kind of create, our own like kind of community and space around this place, and what really is a really thriving agricultural community in like Columbia County and northern Dutchess County. And again, I think something that has always been at the heart of our farm is building good jobs and kind of career pathways in ag for other people. Because that's how, we learned from working on farms, and we're inspired to start our own, and we want to kind of keep that trajectory going. So.
And then down the bottom middle there are two kids.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And that's another thing too, is we're finally living on the farm as a family, which feels really special. And they get to grow up in this beautiful place with the Rojan and the woods and, eating strawberries in season. Oh, and this is this I added just because I think it is, somewhat relevant. Our name, which people ask about often, actually is well, you can read it there, but it's a kind of antiquated agrarian term that just kind of outlined the kind of basic tenets of a lease agreement. And I think, it's been a self-fulfilling prophecy, obviously, for us.
That's that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason and Finegan. Thank you so much, Terence. We are now going to transition into our Q&A portion of the night. I see one question already in the chat. Don't be shy, and I'll get the ball rolling for us. So this is a question for both Terence and for Finegan and Jason. And I feel like we've kind of heard a lot about this tonight, just to make this thing that feels more implicit, explicit. To tell us, why do you think there's a need for this type of partnership between farmers and land trusts to create opportunities for affordable farmland?
Well, I think Terence touched on this a little bit, but so the Hudson Valley is, I think, a beautiful and actually like interesting place to grow food. There is a lot of markets here. However, I think cost of living is really high, right? So wages are not keeping up to housing costs in the area. So that means that, farmers and farm workers really just can't afford to be here and farm here. But there is this demand for us, right, for farmers and for local food. So something's not quite right, and then we need kind of help and tools from either the nonprofit sector or, the government to kind of help bridge that gap. Terence, I don't know if you want to.
No, I mean, I would just echo that. I think that, unfortunately, we're in this position where CLC's work for farmland is necessary to ensure that the farming that is here currently can remain, and that hopefully we can continue to thrive as a farm economy as part of like a significant part of Columbia County, because everybody relies on it both for food, like Finegan mentioned, for just maintenance of our landscape. And I think in many ways, no one does that better than a farmer. And a farmer who owns their land and has autonomy on their choices can make those long-term decisions in a way that they can't when they're leasing. I think this is one example of an array of tools CLC is trying to employ to um, make it more feasible for more farmers like Jason and Finegan to come into the area.
Thank you both. We have a few kind of like process questions in the chat. One person wanting to hear um, more about what it means to have equity in the farm. So I think just kind of diving into that aspect of this model. And then, wondering like, this is kind of just logistics. Like, do you make lease payments for the land? And, Finegan and Jason, the amount that you're comfortable kind of getting into that.
Yeah, and I can jump. Yeah,
Go ahead, Terence. Go ahead.
I was going to say in terms of lease payments. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but um, that's obviously an important part of it. The lease payments that Jason and Finegan pay to the Columbia Land Conservancy was established based on local rental rates in the area. So there was research done into that, and then we're able to consider the tax payments that Jason and Finegan pay directly as part of their rent, and then they pay the difference to CLC, which also helps CLC cover our overhead expenses for administering the ground lease over time, which we expect over the length of the lease being rather minimal, because Jason and Finegan are doing a lot of the heavy lifting of maintaining that property. Um, but there is still expenses that CLC incurs. So in order to make this a fair transaction so that there's no private benefit, but it is really just a land opportunity, there is a lease payment that is on par with what a farmer would expect to pay for the property. And then Jason Finnegan, I don't know if you have anything to add to that or about the equity of owning the
Oh, yeah.
improvements.
Could you repeat the equity question, Mallory? We can dive into that.
Yeah, it's broad. It just asked to say more on having equity in the farm and kind of what that means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's your traditional real estate ownership where you have equity in the land and everything that you put on it. And then there's a lease where you have equity in nothing and you just pay your lease payment and you don't own any of the things. And we're in the middle here where we don't own the land, but we do own everything above it. So any improvements improvements is a funny word that you've heard us say and maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, but in the ground lease jargon, improvements refer to any improvements made on the land, not like us improving the house necessarily or the barn, but the house itself is an improvement. So any improvements on the land we own, and then when we go to transition this lease to the next farmer, those get assessed by an appraiser and assigned a value, and that's our equity. So anything we do above ground is worth money to us. Uh, and if we were in a traditional lease model, it wouldn't be.
Yeah,
We wouldn't own any of that stuff.
and I think also, I mean, in just to add on to that too, I mean, I think, historically, a lot of, farmers' retirement is their land, right? Like, is the property they own. And the fact that like that could be sold someday. That's obviously not the case in this situation. So while we can build equity in improvements, we also, I think, something we have to think about for ourselves is like there's a kind of lower cost of living associated with this scenario, and so we need to just basically save more money as we grow the business, because eventually once we stop farming, we won't be living here anymore. So we hope to retire, we hope to afford to live somewhere else someday. So that's something that we need to be considering also.
And I would say too, if there's time, one interesting thing we came across when we went through this transition is initially Don and Marnie and CLC wanted to consider the blueberries and perennial plants as something that we would call an improvement, like Jason's saying, a blanket term, something that has value going from one farmer to the other. And the initial lease stipulated, and an appraiser is going to give us that value. And then we got to this point of the transition, and the appraiser kind of pointed out, like, we don't really do that. So we ended up, working through that with Jason Finegan and Don and Marnie. But one of the improvements I think we've made in terms of building equity is Jason and Finegan helped craft language so that we can value those perennials based on their revenue. And so by tracking the revenue that comes out of them, we can come up with a fair value when they sell it to the incoming farmers whenever the next transition happens. There were a couple of examples I think that Jason and Finegan were integral into helping us figure out how do you consider the value of like a well that really doesn't depreciate in the same way that a greenhouse might over 15 years. And so we were able to, I think, this ground lease 2.0 that we came up with in this iteration is a really nuanced way of considering that equity question.
So sorry if I missed a moment where I was called upon. My Zoom just crashed. Um, so sorry about that all. Terrence, are we at the place where you could use another question? Again, apologies,
Yeah.
everybody. My internet must be glitching. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I know we had one question earlier. Now the chat is gone, so I'm going to skip forward. I see another question in here that says, um, asking what would trigger incoming farmers. I think this is someone asking like about the 99 ground year lease process. So what would trigger new farmers coming onto the farm?
Generally, it should be initiated by Jason and Finegan. And so when they're prepared to transfer the lease, it's kind of their call. And then the process that they could take with it could be they're doing that search themselves and then just asking CLC's approval by kind of hand selecting somebody. It could be something more akin to what we did here. It could be them saying like we're ready and CLC would handle it. But I think having gone through this process with Jason and Finegan, I think we're all cognizant of like what's the ideal way to go through this. Yeah, but it would be triggered by the farmers.
All right, our next question. Someone is wondering about examples of unanticipated situations. I'm not sure if this is referring to just the farming process at large or the transition process. I'll kind of leave it to both of you to interpret that. And then, if so, what were the strategies to resolve these unanticipated issues?
What advice do you to? Take your pick.
Um, I mean, I think for us, a lot of it was unanticipated because we had never gone through this process before, right? So, um, again, I will like Terrence mentioned this, but we in this whole transaction, we obviously needed a lawyer, and we were actually it was Sarah Chase recommended that us to get in touch with Jack Hornicle at the Pace Food Law Clinic, and he like was amazing for us because he had done a lot of farm transition kind of projects before. So he had done this process. So he was he kind of guided us through much of the of the process that we knew nothing about. I'm trying to think of like Terrence, do you have anything that comes to mind of like an example of something super unanticipated? I mean, the blueberries were pretty unanticipated, I guess.
Yeah. So the blueberries, which initially Don and Marnie had planned to retain ownership of, kind of came on later on in the process of like, oh, we're ready to get rid of those two. Um, I would say too, I think just timing. I
Yeah.
think I know the goal was like Jason Finnegan could have started ground lease would transfer right in April. There were a couple of considerations like it was complicated. Like Finegan was saying, like they're moving not just their operation but their family thousands of miles, and um, trying to coincide that with a growing season to lose as little of their momentum and revenue as possible, and syncing up with Don and Marnie's retirement was very very complicated, and it ended up being a staggered structure. So we had to go through a sublease situation that was very complicated because there are multiple levels of protection on the property, and so they first sublease the ground lease from Marnie from April until July, when it everything kind of coincided to make sense actually have an official closing. So then the sublease had to kind of be able to be dissolved and the ground lease continue. And there are just levels of complication around that.
Yeah, and one thing that wasn't mentioned at all in this, but in the process of this whole, Don did pass away during this process, so that made things even more complicated. That one of the previous farmers wasn't here anymore. And it was very sad for everyone, but very I mean, he was ill, so not completely unanticipated, but no one knew what to do in that exact situation. So
Yeah, and I was going to bring that up before we wrapped up. I did want to just call attention to the fact Don McLean had been a board member for CLC for some time, is very active in the community, and unfortunately he did pass away. It was after he and Marnie selected Jason and Finegan, and he got to work with Jason and Finegan and talk about the transition. So I know that this was in line with everything they were planning. But I did want to, through all of this, just lift up Don and Marnie for first creating this ground lease. It took a lot of work and it took a lot of willingness and commitment on their part to get this going. And they were fully committed to it. And it's a huge loss that we don't have Don, but we do have the ground lease. And I just wanted to kind of thank them for that as well.
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. We were thinking a lot about Don because we were mulching the strawberries and we got to use, he was kind of a inventor of sorts with farm equipment and whatnot. So we actually got to like put one of his rigged up inventions to work with mulching the strawberries. He kind of modified a manure spreader into a mulcher. So anyways, I think it felt good to be putting it to use just, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that's really special. Thank you for sharing, and then thank you again, Terence, for calling out Don's legacy and his role in creating this opportunity. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. This is a little bit of a pivot. Another question that's come through to the chat, asking, I think Jason and Finegan, if you are anticipating the primary source of labor on the farm being H-2A workers, if you could give us some insight into that.
Not currently. We've never worked with the H2A system before, and it's got some particular requirements that need to be met, included housing provided, which we don't have available to us here. That said, maybe in the future, there is the property itself is restricted by a conservation easement, but that does allow for the building of additional structures, and one of those structures that would be easily allowable would be housing for farm workers. So yeah, at the moment, we're just looking to hire from the Hudson Valley community because we can't put anyone up here. There's only one house, and we live here with our two children. But it is hard to find labor, and the H2A program and we've known a number of people who have used it for their labor in the past, and it's been great. So,
And really great for retention too.
yeah. So, it's a possibility, but not at the current moment.
And just for folks on the call who might not be familiar, would you be able to elaborate at all about what the H2A program is?
Yeah, it's the migrant worker program. H2A is the name of the visa that is given to migrant farm laborers. A lot of them coming from around here, I know there are a lot of people coming from, Mexico, obviously,
Jamaica.
and a lot of Jamaicans work on apple farms, but yeah, it's migrant farm worker visas. But there are lots of requirements, including minimum pay, which is very important. I think the pay rate is decent, not great, but decent, better than federal minimum wage for sure.
True.
And then yeah, there are housing requirements and transportation requirements and like overtime requirements or maximum allowable work hours and things like that, so there are some good protections with that program.
Great. Thank
And I
you.
would say, though it wasn't part of our request for proposals, Jason and Finegan's approach to farm labor and putting those ethos forward in their proposals and all of our conversations, I think personally was heartening to hear that like that's a consideration as part of a commercial operation.
Thank you. As our time is winding down here, I want to ask a question to both Finegan and Jason and Terence. So Finegan and Jason, how might individuals on the call get to know Steelbow and get to support you guys and more broadly local farms? And then Terence, you're on deck because I'll also ask you how individuals on the call might get to know CLC and support us in doing this work as well.
Well, we're excited to actually, so this is our 2026 will be our first season managing the U-pick strawberries here, the organic U-pick strawberries, which have kind of a huge legacy and are really well loved. So I feel like who doesn't want to come pick berries on a beautiful June day? I think that'd be a great way to come meet us and see the property. And yeah, and really honor what the community and the history that Don and Marnie have made here.
But yeah, I mean, in the larger context, how do you support small farms in your communities? You prioritize purchasing their products when they're available, which is not always because we're seasonal businesses, many of us. But yeah, we will have the U-pick, and knock on wood that we'll have a good strawberry season this year as our first strawberry season. We'll see. We haven't done it before, so but the blueberries were great next year, so we'll have strawberries and blueberries, and hopefully we plan to sell to have veggies for sale alongside of those when we're open. And
But yeah, also, I mean,
we've got other things at retail establishments
yeah,
and hopefully in restaurants, and yeah, just support your farm.
Yeah, get to know the farmers around you and see how you can buy their stuff, really, so that we can all keep farming.
I was going to say the same thing: is get to know your farmers. Find ways to get out to wherever their food is. But I think also just appreciating the role farmers play in Columbia County will go a long way. And I think both towns can do that. I see Mary Gill is on the call, and she is helping Chatham Agricultural Partnership for decades, I think, at this point. And I think it's made a difference. So now Chatham has a preservation fund that is going to be able to take some tax revenue and protect farmland with that. I think there's a lot we can do on multiple levels in Columbia County. And as far as CLC and how you can support us doing this work, I think it's getting to know us and what we do with easements and this preemptive purchase rate and this ground lease model. The more you know about that, the more you might be able to support us the next time we need to have a community fundraiser in a situation like this, or the next time we're looking for support for another conservation easement project. And if you know any farmers who might be interested in this, please pass them our way, because our first step is always just talking to people about what all of this work is and how it might help them further their own goals.
Fantastic. Thank you all. I can't resist. You guys said you were vegetable nerds. Finegan and Jason, quickly just tell me your favorite vegetable to grow, and then I'll let everybody go.
To grow
or to eat?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Oh.
What are you gonna say?
Eggplant.
To grow and eat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I love chicories. So I love radicchios, and I love forcing chicories too. So that's like a whole really nerdy specialty thing. But those are my favorite to grow and eat. I don't know. It's hard to choose. Vegetables are so good.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Jason and Finegan. We can give a virtual round of applause. Thank you, Terence, for our speakers tonight, and all of you for the thoughtful questions and for taking some time on a Thursday night to join us here at CLC. As Terence said, I won't be here, but there is another community conversation on February 19th that's going to be all about the community forest that's been formed in Taconic. So please mark your calendars, and we'll be sending an email with the recording, with links, ways to get to know Jason and Finegan to keep connecting with CLC. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care, everyone.